The next set of questions we looked at was, when do people add charitable estate gifts and when do they drop them? We were looking first at when do people drop charitable plans. And it turns out that during the course of this study, there were 1,306 senior adults who dropped the charitable component of their estate plan during the course of the study. That means they initially said yes, they had a charitable estate plan, but then later said no, I've not made any provisions for charities in my will or trust. What were those factors that triggered the dropping of the charitable estate plan? In other words, here we're looking at changes that happened during that time that may have been triggers for the charitable estate plan being dropped. Well, we've got some familiar answers. Becoming a grandparent was the #1 dominant factor in predicting that the charitable estate plan would be dropped. The #2 dominant factor was becoming a parent, for those who may have married or become a parent otherwise. The third factor, and this was quite a ways behind, was stopping current charitable giving. So obviously if somebody stops giving, there's a likelihood that they're also going to remove the charitable component from their estate plan. And then finally, a drop in self-rated health. Now there were some other factors that didn't predict that somebody was going to drop a charitable estate component. For example, a change in income, a change in assets, a change in marital status. None of those suggested that an individual was going to that they were going to drop the charitable estate plan. This is kind of important these days because a lot of people have experienced a decrease in either income from having to change jobs or lose a jobs, or from assets based upon their investments. This research suggests, at least for the period from under examination from about 1995 to 2006, that when individuals had a drop in assets, that did not predict that they were going to drop a charitable estate plan. Well, let's look at the flip side of that now. When do people add charitable estate plans? In this study, there were 1,477 seniors who initially said no, they did not have a charitable estate plan, but then later said yes, they had made provisions for charities in their will or trust. What were the factors that triggered the addition of a charitable estate plan? Well, the #1 factor was starting to make charitable gifts. Individuals who were not donors before, who became donors, were also likely to add a charitable estate plan. An improvement in self-reported health also helped, as well as an increase in assets. As individuals' assets increased, they were more likely to add a charitable estate plan. So it seems to be a factor that works in one direction but not the other, because with a decrease in assets, we didn't see a likelihood of dropping that charitable estate plan, but we did see a likelihood of adding the charitable estate plan when assets increased. And again, there was one factor that dramatically reduced the likelihood that a new charitable plan would be added, and that was the addition of the first grandchild. When the addition of the first grandchild happened, it dramatically decreased the likelihood that a new charitable estate plan was going to be created. Well, that's some of the research results. How do we take information from that and apply it to everyday fundraising and planned giving? Well, I think one of the suggestions is to realize that if you have a normal donor list, then your donors over 50, 90% of those folks don't have charitable estate plans. And about 90% of them are going to die without any charitable estate plan unless you do something different in your fundraising and planned giving practice. That's the norms that we're dealing with. The second thing to keep in mind is that it may not be something that makes the most sense to simply recruit planned giving donors from a top-down perspective. That is, it's quite common that we want to spend the most time talking about planned giving to individuals based upon their level of giving to our organization. But it turns out that if we know them well enough to know whether or not they have children, that the absence of children winds up being such a dominant factor that we need to be having conversations with our donors who fall into that category because of the extraordinary likelihood that they're going to be engaging in charitable estate planning. So don't just look at the list from top donors down. Also look at any individuals that you find out are older and do not have children or grandchildren. You have been listening to an episode of Research in Fundraising with Dr. Russell James. This podcast has been a service of the University of Georgia's College of Family and Consumer Sciences and the University of Georgia's Institute for Nonprofit Organizations.